Hello and welcome to another exciting Blender tutorial. Today we're going to be making this geometry node sandcastle setup. What we're going to do is first off, I'm going to clear the scene. A to select all, X to delete. And then we are going to start with a plane. I'll go mesh, plane, scale this up. And I'm just going to create a basic starting landscape, okay? So what I'm going to do is hit F3 and I'm going to go apply scale. I'm going to come here and go into edit mode. I'm going to hit F3 and type subdivide, and we are going to subdivide this 10 times. That should be fine. And then I'm going to go into edit mode, select proportional editing, grab a vertex, and I'll just come up like this and a bit like that. Okay, I'm going to right click shade smooth, and we're going to switch this to the shader editor. And with this plane selected, let's click new to create a new shader. And I'm just going to zoom in here really tight so we've got a nice view of it. And I'm going to switch to rendered view. I'm going to click the drop down and I'm going to turn off scene world. This will give me a built-in HDRI to light my scene. So this is like the world shader. So, and I'm going to grab, I'll come over here and grab this one because it's got a nice kind of blue sky. So first thing I'm going to do is create a base color that feels like sand. So I'm going to go Shift A and I'm going to grab a color ramp. And I'm going to pick some sandy looking colors. I want these to be not too far apart. So something like these colors here. And I'm going to plug this into the base color. And then to drive this color ramp, so it's got some shape to it, I'm going to take the factor, drag it back, and then let go. It'll automatically pull up the search for me. And then I'm going to type in Voronoi. And I want to use the, I can't remember actually. So we'll just go with distance. Yes, cool. Distance value is what we want. Okay, now we're going to use this to drive the sand, and we want to have this be really small. So I'm going to drag this up, but before we get too far, you can see kind of the effect that it creates. So it's this like cell shaded pattern. We're going to go for like a really tiny cell pattern, but I want to use a different vector because I want to be able to set this material on anything, no matter how big it is or how small it is, where it is in the scene and stuff. And I want it to feel like I don't see any repeating patterns. So if I create a material and I just use the standard vector input, it's going to use the generated vector. So let's bring that up. I'll just type in texture coordinate, and there's all the different options, and generated is the one that's going on by default. But this is going to mean that if I create different objects, they're all going to have the same pattern, and I don't want that. So I also want things to blend into each other. So if I set stuff next to each other, they're going to have a pattern that flows onto each other. So we're going to use an object outside of our shader to set the coordinates. So I'm going to go Shift A and I'm going to create a empty plane axis empty. Now with this empty, I'm going to come over here and select it in the drop down. And now I'm going to use the object coordinate to set my vector. Now, what did we just do? Let me make this a bit smaller so you can actually see it now. What we've done is by setting this up, I can grab this empty, which is down here underneath my scene. I'll just bring it up so we can see it. And as you can see, wherever I move it, it's moving the texture across the surface. So this is really useful because now I can, for example, create a UV sphere and put the material on it. Okay, and now if I set this guy so that it's on the sand here, I can grab this and I can move it around, and you can see it's going to just slide across both of these surfaces. But it feels like it's the same kind of size, right? The little Voronoi pattern is the same size across both these objects. No matter how big or how small this is, it's going to fit together with everything else. And that's what we want. So by using an external object like this, you can also scale the size of the pattern based on the size of the empty and stuff. So it's a cool way to kind of interactively affect the shaders, your procedural textures within shaders. So it's a great little technique, and we're going to use it to help us out. Okay, so now that we've set the object coordinate up, what we're going to do is take this scale and we're going to increase it up, let's see, maybe to 50 for now. And we're also going to use this same pattern to drive a bump. So I'm just going to zoom in so we can really see it. And I'm going to create a bump node. And I'll take the distance and plug it into the height. And I'll take the normal and plug it into the normal. We want these to go in like this. So these need to be concave. So if yours looks different for some reason, it shouldn't. But you can always invert the bump to get the opposite effect. But we don't want these to be rounded. We want them to be like little divots inside. And it's going to create this pockmark feel, which is what we're going to use to create the realistic sand. Now I'm going to take the distance down to about 0.1. You might need to adjust this differently on yours, but the idea with the distance is as you drag it down, you'll see it has a slightly, it's not like turning the strength down. It's actually changing how high and low the values are. But we actually want these a little bit high. So I am going to work with 0.1 so I can get this really sharp contrast between the two. Now, since this is driving the bump and the color ramp, the dark value down here is actually coloring the lower section darker, and the bright value is coloring the top section brighter. So this is going to help us kind of accentuate this effect a little bit more by having these slight variation in the color. Now, the next thing I'm going to do with sand is sand has this really shiny, specky polish to it. So you can see little flecks of light all over it. So we're going to turn our roughness down to like something like 0.1. Now, again, roughness is how reflective the surface is. So if it's 0, it's a mirror. And if it's 1, it's completely opaque, like dirt, right? It's just, you're not going to see any reflection. We're going to come over here and we're going to create a second Voronoi texture. Shift D and duplicate this Voronoi. And I'm going to change the scale. I might take this one down a bit so it's a little bit bigger. This second one we'll keep set to 50. I might even make this one 20, make it much bigger. And we'll keep this one 50. And I will take the object coordinate and plug it into the vector. Now we want to mix these guys. So let me show you it this way so that it makes sense. I'm going to unplug the material output and just bring it over here. And I'm going to plug the distance straight into the surface so we can just see what this is creating, this distance output. So you can see what it does is it makes this black and white pattern, right? The Voronoi pattern, it's representing it in black and white values. We want to mix this with this black and white pattern up here, which is a little bit bigger. So we're going to use a mix color node, and I'm going to just drop it here, and we'll plug the first one into A, the second one into B. Now let's look at the result in the surface. Now, when it's set to mix, you can see that it's basically like fading between the two, right? And that can be the right look sometimes. But what we want to do is actually mix these guys together in a way that allows them both to be fully active. So I'm going to use the multiply feature to do this. Now, the blending mode multiply, you think about these as numbers. Wherever it's white, it's a 1, and wherever it's black, it's a 0. And everything in between is a gradient between those values. When you multiply one number by another, so let's say we have another value, let's say we have a white point where it's white, it's 1. And we have this other Voronoi texture, we've got a really dark bit that's going to overlap with it, and it goes to 0. When you multiply 0 by 1, what do you get? 0. So it will turn it into black. So it's a way of allowing the blacks to be fully black and overlap on top of each other, while the light values won't really affect the other one at all. So this should help us get a really nice mix between the two. So I'm going to switch this to multiply. And as you see, as I turn the factor up, one of them isn't fading off. The other one is actually just increasing it and going into it even further. Okay. Now this is pretty good. We can create some color ramps in here if we wanted to create even more variation, but I think this is all right. I don't think I want to color ramp this. So I'm going to bring my material output back over here and plug this back in, and I will take this result and use it as the height of my bump map. And now you'll see we get this double up, this dual pattern that's going on, which is quite nice. So right now we're getting a lot of sheen, right? You see how reflective this is? It's getting quite glossy, and I don't really want that. I want this to not reflect quite as much. So I'm going to adjust that a little bit. I'm going to go to the specular drop down, and I'm going to turn the IOR level, which is index of refraction. I'm going to turn this down to 0.1, and that will just kind of pull that back a lot. Right. What we're going to do now is we are going to create a geometry node system that will affect basically creating some shells and some more larger sort of pieces broken up across the surface. Okay. So let's switch from the shader editor over to the geometry nodes editor. And I want to go to the wrench tab here, and we are going to add another modifier on our stack for geometry nodes, and we'll click new. And we'll call this shells. Now, we've got our input and output at the moment, and we're going to keep those, but we're going to add onto it. So we're going to create a distribute points on faces node. And I'm going to drop this here, and you can see it switches. We now have a bunch of points. We can increase the density. And what we're going to use is actually the Poisson disk. And I'm going to turn my density max way up, maybe to like 300. And I'm going to turn my density factor down just a little bit. What we're going to do is now we want to instance some stuff on this, but we also want to join it back up with the original geometry because we don't want to lose it, right? So I'm going to create a join geometry node and drop it here at the end. And I'll take my input and just bring it over here. So that way We have a branch that goes off and creates the points, and we have our original, which goes across here, is preserved. All right, let's zoom back in. Now, let's create some shells. I'm going to create a UV sphere. So go search UV sphere, and we'll drop this down. I'm going to turn this right down to like 6 and 5, or maybe 3. We'll adjust this, I think, as we go. Now I'm going to create a instance on points node and drop this here. The instance on point node will look for wherever you have a point generated by a points node like this, and we'll replace it with a piece of geometry called an instance. And I'll stick that here. And now we're going to take this radius down to like 0.1, maybe. Take this rotation and drag it down and let go. And we're going to type in random and just hit return for random value. And we can just leave this as is. That will just randomly rotate them between 0 and 1. And then I'm going to take the scale and drop this down, and we'll do the same thing. Random value. Yeah, we got a lot of interesting shapes. I think I will keep this, because the shells and the little rocks that make up sand, they get broken up and they're distorted, and there's lots of different flavors to how they feel. So we'll keep it like that. All right, cool. Now we need a material for these guys. So we need to set the material within geometry node. So I'm going to come over here. We're going to create a set material node. And I'll just drop it on this part, not up here, right? Because we already have this material on this bit. I'll drop this here. Now, if we want to be specific, I can drop this here, and we can set our sand material. So our landscape will maintain with the sand material. And this one, we're going to create a new material. So I'll go back over here, and I will click this plus symbol to create a new slot. I'll grab sand, and then I'll click the double paper icon to make it a duplicate. So now it's called sand 01. We're going to call this shells. All right, and I will assign shells here in the geometry nodes for that bit. So I'm going to come over here to the shader editor and make sure we've got shells active. So if you have sand selected, you'll see it says sand here, but we want to make sure you click on shells. Also, by having them in the material slots here for our main object, they actually aren't affecting anything. They're not being applied, because now that we have a geometry nodes object on this this piece of mesh, that's what's driving what the materials get applied to. But I like to put them on the geometry nodes object just as a convenience thing, so I can select them and edit them as I want. So, okay, so we got our shells. I'm going to turn off my show overlays. That will allow me to see these guys kind of on their own. Now I'm really going to change one thing. I'm going to come down, and first I would take the roughness all the way down to 0. Make these really reflective. I'll take the specular back up to 0.5. And I'm going to give it a bit of a tint. I'm going to kind of orange it up a little bit. And then I'm going to come to subsurface, and I'm going to turn this up to 1. I want subsurface scattering on these guys. Now we're going to turn on ray tracing as well at this point. We're using Eevee, but we need to make sure we turn on ray tracing. I'm going to come into my render tab and come right down here to ray tracing and turn that on. All right. Now with subsurface here, I'm going to turn up, I want these guys to be have the red really strong. So I might turn this up to like 2. And I'll keep these down low. And then I'm going to take my scale up. I'm going to try 0.1. I'll just zoom back a little bit. I'm also going to need to create a light, I think, to really start feeling the effect of this. So I'm going to go Shift-A, Light, Sunlight. And I'm going to rotate that sunlight off to the side a little bit. And I'm going to turn it up. We're going to turn it up to 10 here. And I'll just rotate this around a little bit. Cool. Now you can see what's happening with that subsurf. These little shells now are really picking up the light, and they're glowing a little bit. They've got this like reddish kind of glow to them. Let's turn the density up on these. You got to be careful with this, right? If you go too high with the density, it's going to really like destroy your machine. So just watch out for this. I might turn the distance down on these guys a little bit too. All right, so let's go back over to the geometry node editor, and now we can start dialing this in. I'm going to take my density factor up. Now, instead of dragging, that can really kill your machine. So I'm going to just click and type in some numbers. So I'll just do a 0.6. Maybe I'll go up to 0.8. And I want to take this whole system right here, and I'm going to Shift-D to duplicate and bring it over. This will be our second system. I'll take the geometry, and I'll plug it into the mesh, and then I'll take this output and I'll plug it into the join geometry node. Now we need to change the seed. So I'm going to change the seed just to a random number on each of these so that we get different results. And with this one, I'm going to take the density down to like 0.2 or something, and I'm going to take the scale up to 2. So I get some really big ones. Instead of the shell material with these guys, because they're going to look a little weird, I might, being this big, I might switch this to sand. Keep them there. To really start to bring in the realism, we're going to create a camera. So Shift A, camera, and I will jump into my camera view, lock my camera to the view, and then I'm going to come up and get a nice angle. Do all this stuff. Let's turn on depth of field, and I'm going to focus somewhere here close to the front of the lens. And I'm going to turn my f-stop down to like 1, maybe 0.1. Go really far with it. Because the idea is we're making like really up close sand. Now, one of the hard things with realism is that you really have to fine tune everything. You've got to really tweak, and change things and watch it closely and to get a sense of like if it's coming together or not. So that's something you're gonna have to do with this. And it takes a little bit of time. It's a little bit hard to get it just right. But everything down to like how dark this, part of the shader goes is going to affect things in pretty significant ways. So there is a lot to figure out and dial in, but it's a lot of fun once you get this kind of working. So I'm going to darken this up a little bit so that it looks like we've got these like little flecks of another type of rock in here. Yeah, cool. All right. So now that we got this shader working and the geometry node system working on top of it really well, let's take this one more notch. Let's actually create a system that can allow us to build sand castles. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick a spot here in my scene, maybe up here on top of this or somewhere else. I'm not sure. Let's see. Right here. I'll just shift right click there and I'll go Shift A, mesh cylinder, create a cylinder. And I'll just make sure it's intersecting all of that right there. Go into edit mode and turn our widgets back on. Select this top face. I might bring it up a touch and scale it down some. There we go. And then let's create a little window. Actually, first I'll just grab I'll do Control R to create a loop cut, and then Control R to create another loop cut, and then grab these faces, and I'll hit E to extrude, and just push them in like that. Okay, so I've got this little object. Actually, focus on it so you can see it. And then let's take this and let's use something in geometry nodes to make this feel like sand. So I'm going to go to the modifiers tab. I'm going to create a new geometry nodes, and I'll click new here, and I'll call this one, let's see, sand castle. All right, and then let's come over to geometry nodes, and we've got the sand castle geometry node system, and we're just going to create two nodes here. We're going to create the mesh to volume node, and we'll drop this here. We'll turn it into a volume, and then we're going to go volume to mesh. And we'll drop this here. There we go. That creates a sort of sandy pattern. Might also shade smooth, maybe. Actually, we'll leave that because I feel like these little faceted bits kind of add to the realism a little bit. Sand tends to band like this as well. So now let's create a set material node, and we will grab the sand material. And because we use the object coordinate, it all blends together nicely. Next thing I want to do is actually add in our shell system. So we can actually stack geometry nodes. So I'll do another geometry node system, and I'll grab shells and put that on it. All right, let's just enhance this a little bit. The sun's not quite bright enough to get the right look, so I'm just going to take my strength up to maybe 50, and I'll also rotate it up and get it so it's more pointing top down. There you go. So now you can really start to see changing the pieces. This is something you're going to have to tweak a lot yourself. The size of these individual shell pieces, the little extra, bits of the grains of sand that are a bit larger. So now with these two geometry node systems, what you can do is sculpt out any kind of shape you want with just a really basic base mesh. Like if I go here and just turn off all the effects, right? And you can see that, we've got really simple geometry, just some cylinders, a couple of cones, and some boxes at the top. First off, the sandcastle modifier, the one that we have from geometry nodes, turns it into that sandy looking shape. And then the next one adds the shells on top, and with the shader working for us, it ends up looking quite realistic. So thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this tutorial, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks to everyone who supports on Patreon and everyone who supports here by joining on YouTube. Really appreciate all of you. If you want to get the full uncut version of this tutorial, which runs quite long, it's like about 2 hours long, You can get access to that on the Patreon at any tier, along with on YouTube. If you join on YouTube at the All Access Pass level and higher, you get the uncut versions of all these tutorials. So if you like deep dives and extra info, that's where you get it. If you want to get this project file, you can join at the second tier and up on Patreon. Thanks so much. Really appreciate all of you, and I will catch you in the next tutorial. See ya.